Yeah.
So you're there.
Okay.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, welcome everyone to a dynamic event that we're having here today. It comes at a troubled time for all of us. And my name is Rohan Preston. I write about theater and performing arts for the StarTribune in Minneapolis. And we are all here. I'm here with two really great thinkers and great people in the arts, people I happen to be able to call friends. Guenveur Smith is a writer, performer, artist, Renaissance artist, and he's done a number of works. And I'll have him introduce himself, and then Sarah Bellamy, as well as the brilliant prophetic leader of Penumbra Theatre in St. Paul. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be with you both.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Sarah, go ahead.
What to say about myself right now in this moment? I think I'm learning a lot about myself in this moment as we think about how we're called to rise to the need. Traditionally, I'm an artistic director. I am a director. I'm a writer. I'm a mom of 2 young boys. I am trying to figure out how to cement some of the change that is happening because of the momentum of the tragedies that we've experienced in our cities here. I'm a believer in better tomorrows, but I'm also really weary and worn right now. So I think that's how I would introduce myself at this moment. Roger, what would you say about you right now?
I'm not going to talk about me. I'm going to talk about you as a tremendously gracious host. You have welcomed me at Penumbra in St. Paul on 3 occasions. First with my crazy comrade, Mark Broyard. We did a show which we call a not too dark comedy called Inside the Creole Mafia. And then we came in with Rodney King, which I know many of you had an opportunity to view recently on Netflix. And most recently with Frederick Douglass now.
Mm-hmm.
And we worked hard, didn't we, Sarah? And now Frederick Douglass, his image is being projected onto the Robert E. Lee Monument in Richmond, Virginia, along with that of Harriet Tubman, along with the Pride flag, and along with the image of a gentleman whom we tragically know, the late George Floyd. This is the moment. This is the movement. This is why we are gathered here. Not just 3 of us, 30 of us, 30,000 of us, 30 million of us, all over this world. We are joined by heart, by soul, by resolve, and we are committed to life. Do you agree, Rohan?
Oh, I absolutely do. And as you're talking, I'm reminded of many things. One is your integrity as an artist and the kind of work that you're doing, and 2, what Sarah said, that as parents, there's a sense of hope that you have to carry. And so I actually what being parents at this moment, how has that affected your work and your outlook?
Well, I am very blessed to be the father of 4, one of whom happens to be an adult, 3 of whom think that they are adults, but they are not. They are still juveniles. And my wife, Latanya, and I are very blessed to have a roof under which to house them and a backyard where they can play horse, because we've been on lockdown for a long time now. And we're allegedly doing homeschooling. Little did we know that the homeschooling would involve, tragically, these things that we have to talk to our children about, explain the difference between murder and execution, to try to make sense of the senseless. This particular moment is a tough one. It's a rough one. But as I say, I feel extraordinarily blessed. There are so many among us who are without roofs, without backyards, without anything to eat, without hope, without resolve. And this dynamic tragedy in which we find ourselves engaged in day after day after day after day now points us to, I think, the real spine of civilization, or the spine of uncivilized.
Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're asking a question that gets to the really raw beating heart of the tender heart of this movement toward justice. I am the mother of 2 small boys. I have a 4-year-old, he'll be 4 on Saturday, and a 6-month-old. And it occurred to me that in these profound moments of social uprising and bearing witness to the violence that is cyclically exacted against Black people, and in particular Black men in this country, I have been nursing my baby boys. And so I remember very viscerally nursing my first child. He was 9 days old when Philando Castile was murdered here in the Twin Cities. And I remember looking down at him and watching him, and his hands were held together and he was nursing. And I just remember thinking, like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to raise this little boy in this world? He's 9 days old, and I am raw from giving birth and from holding him in my body where he was safe, and he's not safe anymore. He's out in the world. And then my second son, you know, he was 10 weeks old when Ahmaud Arbery was murdered. He was 23 weeks old when George Floyd was murdered. And protests erupted all over my hometown. And then after that, Rayshard Brooks was gunned down. He was 25 weeks then. And I started thinking, when did I start marking his baby milestones with death? When did I start doing that? When did I start counting that way? And I think that's the way a lot of Black mothers and fathers and grandmothers and, you know, all of the community that's raising babies, the way that we're thinking about this is like, what can we promise them about the world that's ahead? And how do we hold space for their joy? You know, I mean, their ability to articulate their own expansiveness and resiliency, and I don't want to crush who they are, you know what I mean? So it's this constant, this is not new. I mean, Black Black people have been raising babies in that kind of a tension for generations. And so yeah, it's just a profound meditation that like you have to call on community. You have to call on other people to say, how do I do this? I have to call on the elders. How did you do this? How did you raise babies that could be activists, that could be the leaders of our local NAACP chapter, that could be the president of the United States? How did you raise those babies? Because we need more of them.
And yet I imagine some of the answer will be together, right? Through community. I'm thinking of how W.E.B. Du Bois said that, we need to have a double consciousness sort of to exist in the world. And we have at the moment kind of a double crucible, if you will. We have COVID, which disproportionately impacts people of color, Black people in particular, Latinos. And then we have something that's continued from slavery to today, which is, the violation of Black life and Black bodies just all across the country. I mean, and as you're talking, and I'm thinking that our forebears had to have had kind of a rugged, hard-earned hope, to bring children into this world, and then to say, not only that, we're going to write this.
Yeah, I mean, there are stories, of course, of people throwing children overboard during the ride in the Middle Passage, the slaving trips, because they wanted to spare the babies of what was coming. There's a generational passing down of this trauma that is embedded in the DNA, right? Like that. Mm-hmm. That we, if we understand that, say, finches in the Galapagos can evolve their beaks to survive a certain fly that is attacking their babies, if we can understand that like a species can actually evolve to prevent threat, then of course human beings evolve to survive threat. And the evolution that we as Black Americans have inherited is profound, and there's tremendous resiliency and intelligence that can be unlocked there. And it also houses trauma and a knowing of threat that maybe we haven't exactly experienced, but we're anticipating because of what our ancestors experienced. It's all present. Like, history is alive right now. And that's one of the things that I love about your work, Roger, is that you make the tremendous enormity of this American history present and visceral in the live experience of witnessing theater. And you bring it to bear on a moment, like Rodney King brings all of that to bear on this moment. And that's a profound thing to hold as a performer. Like, I would watch you when you would leave the stage, and I would just see how much you'd given, how much you'd left out there, what the toll of that story, telling that story, was on you. And it's a profound gift to humanity to do that, to embody that, to take that on. So I thank you for that work.
Well, I thank you for welcoming me to such extraordinarily safe space in which to do dangerous work, Penumbra. Rodney King was a father. He was a grandfather. He perished on Father's Day. We don't think of him as such. We think of him as a human piñata, the butt of a joke, perhaps, a long ago obscure historical character. But I think that it's essential that we know him and that we know everyone as a person. He was a second generation alcoholic drowning victim.
Mm.
Natasha Harlins, who was shot and killed at the age of 15, was a second generation handgun victim. The multi-generational absorption of violence in our society is something that we have yet to acknowledge, let alone extinguish. The resolution of conflict through violence in this country continues to haunt us. And we must always acknowledge the ground on which we stand. Whether it's here in California or New York, where you grew up, and Jamaica, where you grew up as well, Rohan.
Mm-hmm.
Burning Spear acknowledged it. The great group Culture acknowledged it in Jamaica, where they said, the Arawak was here first. The Arawak was here first. And Burning Spear said, Christopher Columbus was a damn blasted liar. Yeah.
Mm.
Right?
Yes, he was.
Well, now Christopher Columbus is beheaded, but we done beheaded him from long time. From 1492 when we stood up, from 1619 when we stood up, and from 2020 when we continue to stand up. Get up, stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up, don't forget to fight. To quote one of your great Jamaicans.
Mm-hmm. Roger, both you and Sarah have committed your lives to doing similar work, which includes exploring Black life and art in all its dimensions and complexity, showing its genius, the heart, the wit, the resilience in the face of relentless hostility. What does this historical moment demand from art? And what can theater, what can film do at this moment?
I think we're doing it. We're doing it. We're doing it well. We're doing it. We're doing it. We're doing it well. To quote another poet from Queens, New York. The people that are out there in the street right now, as we speak, are part of a movement of the people. It is a theatrical movement. It is a cinematic movement. There is a young lady, 17 years old only, who is now recognized as a brilliant documentary filmmaker because she pulled out her camera phone and documented the execution of George Floyd. She is an artist. She is a cinematographer. She has lent to the world something of extraordinary value that is changing the world as we speak. And the people who march through the streets, who dance through the streets, who vogue through the streets, 2 snaps up, thank you very much, are using everything, every ounce that we have at our disposal to mash down Babylon.
Mm.
And when our great mentor, Mr. August Wilson, would go into a bar and hear perhaps one little snatch of dialogue, right, Sarah? and put that little snatch of dialogue down on a little piece of paper, and that snatch of dialogue would then become a scene, would become a character, would become a play, would become a 10-play series investigating 10 decades of our life and death, our breath and non-breath in this American experiment. And this is the foundation on which we stand. This is how we work. This is how we have always worked. Frederick Douglass was a performance artist. He was the first rapper that there ever was. If there was no struggle, there was no progress. That was a rapper, Brother Frederick Douglass, right? So it's a tradition in which we move and groove. And the solidarity of the people all over the world are moving and grooving to a variety of beats. Because sometimes it's jazz and sometimes it's hip hop and sometimes it's, reggae. Sometimes it's soca. Jump up and whine, right? And that's theater.
Yeah.
And theater will always be with us because it's a part of human civilization with which we cannot live, without which we cannot live. It's the first thing we want to cut,
Yeah.
budget cuts. Oh, let's cut theater. But no, we need that. We need to gather around the campfire. Right, Sarah?
I love how you're thinking about that, Roger, because I think actually like the word civilization is not necessarily a noun right now, it's a verb.
Mm.
And theater allows us to actually practice that, right? Like what we're asking of Black artists right now, what we're inviting, what we're welcoming, and what we need to resource is that tension between holding what was and telling the story of what's been and dreaming into what could be, dreaming into the reality that we don't yet know because we've always been living under these oppressive structures. And there's tremendous movement within the arts world to push against the racism that has kept Black and brown artists at bay, that has kept them small, that has kept them from exacting their full power and from frankly profiting from their own content production.
Yeah.
There are people in the way of that who are making money off of our voices, our pain, our experiences, and that's not new. That's decades old, right?
Yeah. What did I do to be so black and blue?
Right. And at the same time, like as people are trying to diversify these spaces that have been predominantly occupied by white individuals, how do we also uplift the legacy institutions that have resourced Black artists as the best we can with the limited resources that we've had for as long as we have? So I look at Penumbra as a 44-year-old Black legacy institution that has been constantly undercapitalized over its lifetime and has done the very best by the Black artists that we engage and said, we're going to give you everything that we can. And it might not be as much as you might get over here, but know that we will lift the roof off of our houses to try to make room for your wings to fully unfurl. And I think that right now, the thing that we're asking Black artists to do, whether we know it or not, is to speak into a moment where they're still grieving, where we're all still grieving, and to say, can you translate this for us? Because we can't make sense of it. And that's always an unfair burden, but it's a burden that Black artists have continually risen to over and over. Like James Baldwin, the way he was able to process his own pain, his own rejection from America, to say, let me benefit you as a country, as a nation, and then to be called, a traitor. Like this is a cyclical thing. It's like we're begged for the advancement. We do the work to advance. The labor is not recognized. It's appropriated, and then we're punished for making the statements, right? Like that is the labor of the Black artist in America, and it has been for generations. And the thing that I so appreciate about, Roger, your work is that you put that in this long continuum, that you close the gap. You actually enter into this portal where all of these artists exist on the same plane, where you can put Frederick Douglass in direct conversation with an artist working right now and say, this is the profound archive to which you're heir. Take it, like, benefit from it. Know that all of these people who toiled, like, actually they were anticipating you. You know, there's this beautiful saying that's going around. It's been going around for some time amongst Black activists, but that you are your ancestors' wildest dreams. Like, we could not have anticipated some of the brilliant activism that we're seeing from 17, 18, 19-year-olds. And then I remember when I talked to people like the brilliant Erica Huggins, they were 17, 18, 19 years old when they started the Black Panther Party, when they uplifted this movement. Like, the babies are the ones holding the hope for us, because they haven't been maybe beat down in the way that some of the older folks have, or they don't have families and feel the need, you know, to protect, and whatever it is that puts them in the streets. Like, we have to honor their activism by listening to what they have to say and by ensuring that they're safe in doing so. And especially now with COVID, you know, because all of the pre-existing conditions that make our people more susceptible to this disease are directly attributed to the stress of weathering a racist environment. Hypertension, diabetes, stroke, heart attack, certain cancers, those things make us more susceptible to COVID-19. And those things are directly linked to our experience of racism in this country. And epidemiologists have tracked that. That's not like, that's science. So I think now more than ever, we have to think about the circle of protection that we're putting around those folks that are putting themselves in harm's way to advance this country, even as it's kicking and screaming. Because we need a higher consciousness. We need to reach that level of higher frequency so that we can live up to our full potential as human beings.
That's brilliant, Sarah, and I'll echo and your praise of Roger's work, because there's a kind of hypnosis that happens, and it's because the past and the present are overlaid with each other, and constantly doing struggle, constantly doing celebration, wit, humor, all of the above. I'm thinking specifically not just Rodney King, but also of Frederick Douglass, and really your whole body of work, Roger. So I'd love for you just to speak about how the work essentially is always alive.
Well, thank you both. You're very kind. You're very generous. And I must say to you, Rohan, that the critic is as essential to the development of our work as is the producer, the writer, the performers, the director, because we need thought, we need direction, we need criticism, yes, in order to advance the civilization, this thing called theater. And I thank you for your very astute look at not only the theater, but the entire world of performing arts, which of course reflects the entire world, period.
Thank you.
You know, a lot of people who are watching this have seen the RODNEY KING, and they know that at the end of, this is spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen it, at the end of Rodney King's famous can we get along speech, I appended 3 words: I can't breathe. And I did that as a memorial, of course, to Eric Garner, who was killed in police custody in Staten Island. And those were his last words. But little did I know that those last words would then again be the last words of another man, stomped to death, executed while in custody of the Minneapolis Police Department. I say this to say that I simply am a vessel. And this is my instrument. I don't play the saxophone or the piano. I wish that I would, and I frequently dream that I do, but I don't. This is my instrument. And as I'm speaking right now, there's a helicopter flying over me right here in LA. And that's unavoidable. That's part of the moment, the unavoidable moment. And that, as you recall, was the soundtrack designed by the brilliant Mark Anthony Thompson for the finale of Rodney King. It just flew over. And that, you see, my comrades, is so much a part of what we do. And now I hear birds chirping, and now I hear a siren. And I'm thinking about Duluth. 100 years ago, 3 Black men hanged. And a little boy witnesses that hanging. And then 50 years later, his son by the name of Robert Allen Zimmerman writes a song called Desolation Row. And the first lines of that song go, "They're selling postcards of the hanging. The circus is in town." Because you see, these 3 Black men were in the employ of a traveling circus, and they were accused of sexual assault. And I'm thinking of Bobby Seale and Huey Newton, who's over my right shoulder, listening to this song over and over again in Black Panther Party headquarters, 1965, 1966. And I'm thinking about the biggest execution in US history, December 26, 1862 in Mankato, Minnesota, where 38 Dakota Braves were executed, hanged. You know who signed the death warrant? Abraham Lincoln. Now, don't take that information and attack the Lincoln Memorial and tell them Roger sent you. But that's one of the weird historical conundrums in which we consistently find ourselves in. And that's part of my work too. I was the kid who read the Encyclopedia Britannica for fun. I also read a book called The World's Great Men of Color, which my mom had on our shelf. A 2-volume set edited by a self-educated Pullman porter of Jamaican descent by the name of J.A. Rogers. And I became obsessed with those great men of color, and I have played a couple of them.
One of the I just wanted to pick up that you're drawing together is, you know, I think about postcards of the Duluth hanging. I think about the fact that you can click on several links inside the New York Times and watch murder happen.
Yes.
And I'm very concerned about witnessing all of this violence. I understand we need proof. I understand what Mamie Till did when she said, let them see. Open that coffin, let them see what they did to my baby, my just turned 14-year-old child, let them see. I understand the reckoning that called, the global reckoning, and I get why people are moving now in response to what they saw when George Floyd was murdered. And I think about what the Black artists at Penumbra have continually offered audiences generation after generation. I think about what you offer, Roger, when you come to our space. I think about what August offered over and over in his project to chronicle the African-American experience over 100 years, which is love. It is the details of how we love each other. You see this in the work of Harrison David Rivers and Dominique Morisseau and so, just like John Yates Love. So many of these artists are saying, like, can we look at how we love each other? Because there's so much death out there. So how do we counterbalance this with loving depictions of who we know ourselves to be? And I think that that's part of the journey, the ride that like Rodney King and Frederick Douglass, these pieces that you've constructed, which are so epic in scope, take us on. It is to say, let's look at the painful history, the devastating reality of what's happened, and let's see the powerful resiliency that these people express in these moments. And let's cultivate love for not just them as people, but for their activism. Like, let's love up on that activism, because that is carrying whole communities forward, I worry about all of this violence that we're witnessing. And Rohan, you and I were on a call recently, and I hope you won't mind me mentioning, you
No,
characterized
please.
it as a snuff film, right?
Yeah.
That was the language you used. And it opened, like, I was like, yes, like, what is this doing to our consciousness, to our humanity, to witness this over and over again? Like, how is it actually reifying the violence that we're trying to fight?
Right.
I worry about that.
Yeah, I mean, I have some real problems with not with the filming and the capturing of what happens, but with the trauma and the reliving of trauma and the reawakening and the reinforcing of trauma that happens when you look at an image of Rodney King being beaten savagely, of Eric Garner being strangled to death, of George Floyd under that officer's knee. It's these images do cause us great trauma and pain. And I'm not sure how you take care of yourself in a situation like that. And I have a 17-year-old who, a teenager who is very savvy, but also I want her to not absorb all of this ugliness and have this poison that she carries around with her. It's very, very challenging. So, I think of art as a way of capturing those things and turning them into medicine. But so many of those images are just raw poison for us. I know that recently there's been a rash of people reenacting the killing of George Floyd. Those images are also out there and meant to be provocations. And some of them, I think, that people are just stupid and don't know. But I'm looking at that stuff and thinking, how do we take care of ourselves? How do we protect ourselves? How do we protect the innocence of our children? How do we show them joy, show them light, show them all the other things as well, not just this kind of repeated historical remix trauma?
It's both and, right?
Thank you.
Both and. Like we have to show the joy, And I think it's phenomenally interesting. We saw this in the wake of the Trayvon Martin murder too. Kids laying on the ground with Skittles and iced tea, reenacting, you know, in their minds what they saw as a scene of murder. And I think it's really interesting to go back with that to with a theatrical lens to say, what are they doing? What are white people doing when they step into that violence and they reenact that? What are they trying to process? You know, this is one of the things that I was taking up recently in an article I wrote for the Paris Review, which is about like, how do you embody racial power? And what is the trauma that you're replaying in your body that you need to detoxify from? Because we know that, like I already mentioned, the ways in which people of color experience the embodied trauma and like how that affects our health and well-being. But white people are also affected. And I think it's a phenomenally interesting thing when white people reenact these scenes of violence, because I think they're trying to work through something that they haven't yet arrived cognitively at, but they know in their bodies they're heir to in a certain kind of a way. And they call it a joke, they laugh at it. But I think maybe I'm being too gracious, but I wonder at like, what actually are you playing at? What are you trying to reenact here so that you can get on the other side of it? And I'm not suggesting that we need to be midwives to that journey, but somebody needs to call those young people, because a lot of them are young people, to account for what their behavior is actually instigating. You know, I don't know. I haven't quite figured all that out, but I find it phenomenally interesting, those provocations. I don't think they're entirely malicious. Certainly they have malicious outcomes, but I think there's a curiosity there around privilege and around power that I would like to spend some time unpacking.
You know, a playwright with whom you've been in collaboration, Katori Hall, has a great play called The Mountaintop, which I had the pleasure of directing several times. And we actually took The Mountaintop to Memphis, and we timed it with the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination at the Lorraine Motel. And of course, the motel is now a civil rights museum. And we took our young boys there to experience that. And they came home and kind of acted out a play. And our older son, Cy, dressed up as Dr. King in a suit, and he created a fake mustache for himself. And then our younger son dressed in a ninja costume and got a little toy ray gun. And I said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm James Earl Raygun." And they proceeded, as in a Suzanne Laurie Parks play, to reenact what they experienced at the Civil Rights Museum, the Lorraine Motel, where Dr. King, of course, breathed his last, April 4th, 1968. But who was on the top of the charts in 1968? It was the Delphonics. Many guys have come to you with a lie that wasn't true, and you passed them by. Now you're in the center ring, and the lines don't mean a thing. Why don't you let me try? The things that I'm saying are true, and the way I explain them to you, listen to me. La la, la 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 la, la la la. I love you. So even in the heat of the battle, right, Rohan, we're still singing love songs.
I'm reminded of another song, Roger, that you also love, that Crazy Bald Head. Hatred is your reward for our love.
Telling us of your Lord above.
Mm.
So they came for Columbus. Oh, watch out. They're going to come for white Jesus now. Watch out.
You know, as we're here, and I'm really glad that we have humor as well. I think of the genius that has sustained people, and I think I ask myself, how do we get through this moment and get to the other side? We don't, quote unquote, return to normal, right? Because what was normal like? So how do we change the paradigm and return to something much more improved? And artists, artists have been called on to answer these questions fairly unfairly forever. Black artists in particular have always had to have this other charge, not just entertainment, not just capturing the audience, but moving conversation forward, moving values forward, moving civilization, a country and a world forward. As you were singing the Delphonics, I was reminded of, who I love, by the way, I was reminded of how incredible the music of the 20th century is because of the presence, not just of Black people, period, but Black Americans specifically, right? There's no jazz, no blues, no rock and roll. There is no hip hop. There is no anything, even country and Western. So what would distinguish the 18th century from the 17th century, from the 16th century, from the 19th century, in terms of music? And so I think of just that restorative power of music, that healing power in the middle of the fire, in the middle of the assassination, in the middle of the brutality. And I'm just, I don't necessarily have a question. I'm just moved, Roger, by that. And I'm moved by your brilliance, Sarah. And so I just want to say that now and say thanks to both of you. Let's just keep going. I know.
Now Cardi B is going to come on and she's going to do her version of coronavirus. Hey, that's where it is. If it wasn't for Moms Mabley, we couldn't have made it this far.
That's right.
Igneet Markham, Richard Pryor. Come on. That's the way that we roll.
And the humor.
Yeah.
The wit.
Two real coons, as they call themselves. William Walker. Yeah.
So we are approaching a time now. We have a lot of questions in the chat. People want to know how to be stronger allies and how to broaden the definition of who we are as people, and how Asian Americans, Latinas, for example, their experiences parallel, intersect as well, and how we move forward. I mean, today we are having this discussion on a day when the census, when the population numbers have come out that show that young people of color are a majority of young people in the country for the first time in its history.
Young people of color are the majority in my house.
And mine too. But is this the sort of ground on which the conversation is happening and the crucibles are happening? Is this what everything is about?
Well, I think that we need to extinguish this word minority It's bandied about far too much for my taste. We're not in the minority. We are in the majority. And Dr. Du Bois would remind us of that. Senghor would remind us of that. Aimé Césaire would remind us of that, right? So let's embrace our international sisterhood, international brotherhood. And let's think about family. Let's think about how we communicate amongst ourselves, with ourselves, how we address ourselves, not just vocally, but spiritually, how we embrace ourselves even through this pandemic. And I think that we can survive, we can go forward, absolutely. My latest piece is inspired by a man by the name of Otto Frank, who was the father of diarist Anne Frank.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the only survivor in his immediate family. He lost his wife, he lost his 2 daughters in the Nazi death camp. He lived a long, productive life. He was the champion of his daughter's work, of course. And I imagine him in that little room, right, with his family and the small extended family who was in that room with them, as the helicopter flies over me in Amsterdam, 1943. Tonight, our hearts are enjoined around this small table. There are 8 of us. That's infinity. But soon there will be only one of us. And that is tragedy. A play within a play, wherein the players are here today and gone tomorrow. And tomorrow. And tomorrow. No sorrow. No tears. Quick note to self, there are many who have lost more and will continue to lose. And this is the lesson of this hour. Miss Billie Holiday's blues. The strange food. Getting stranger. Bye.
I want to just thank you, Roger, for how you hold space and the compassion of your heart and the reach of your scholarship. I think, Rohan, you mentioned, there were so many things that you mentioned when people were asking about what they can do in this chat. And I think that piece that you just shared with us, it creates a greater sense of compassion and understanding around the ways in which many, many different people have been oppressed. It's not the same. It's not the same what's happened to different folks, but we have a president right now who is actively vilifying Asian people, calling the coronavirus Kung flu. Asian people are being attacked. We have people, Lao and Hmong people in Minnesota, that are being beaten because of that administration and the hate that they're perpetuating, right? Like, this is cyclical and it moves from community to community. And what you're doing when you're uplifting that story is profoundly important, because it's, I can understand. I haven't experienced the same thing, but I've experienced something proximate to it. And because of that, my humanity is greater. And so I thank you for your willingness to step into those difficult stories, because it invites audiences to take inventory of our own humanity.
That's great.
Rohan. It's a privilege and it's a profound responsibility that we have, those of us who call ourselves writers, artists. And I can only hope to live up to what has been determined for me in this world. If I had apprenticed with my grandfather, who was a master plumber, I would be able to fix a toilet, but I didn't. So I have to try to fix human emotions. That's my trade.
You know, I wondered, and thank you both for being so brilliant and just for helping us to get centered in this moment of crisis. I wondered, Sarah and Roger, one of the questions that comes up is, how can people help? What can people do at this point? And so, you know, I'm going to ask you not to be bashful and just to say what people can do to help the theater, to help your work at this point.
Sarah, go ahead. I'm ready to get that Venmo from you right now.
I mean, yeah, donate. Donate to Penumbra, donate to Black legacy institutions, donate to BIPOC institutions. That's one way. I mean, I think largely how you can help depends on who you are, right? White folks, do the work to educate yourselves, call each other into authentic conversation. People who are folks of color but not Black, know that we see you, know that we understand that the parallel systems of oppression, and we need your focus right now, we need your support right now, but we are not going to abandon you in your need. Like, we're ready. And for Black folks, like, take care, be compassionate, be gentle, find healing, find resiliency, like, ask other people to stand in the gap. We don't have to carry all the work. Yeah, that's what I would say.
And where can we send that contribution for Penumbra Theatre?
Oh, Roger, thank you. PenumbraTheatre.org. There's a donate button right there. Thank you, Roger.
There it is. People all over the world are pushing that button right now. That's right, people. Penumbra Theatre, that's RE.org. Push that button. Listen, I want to give thanks for this tremendous conversation to both of my colleagues here on screen, but there are several people who are off screen who deserve the love. My comrades in Luna Ray Media, Mr. Stephen Adams and Mr. Bob L. Johnson, who have been with me all the way in this journey. And of course, the woman who organized this thing for us technically and spiritually as well, Megan Culbertson.
Thank you, Megan.
It takes much more than a village. It takes a whole world, and we're trying to pull that world together right now. So we thank you all out there for being with us. We hope that you will spread the word. This will go in perpetuity, I believe, on YouTube. And so you will be able to run it and rerun it. I believe that Rodney King is available courtesy of Netflix, complimentary screenings currently. So please take advantage of that if you have not already. I think we're there, right, Rob?
We are. I just want to extend my personal thanks to say what an honor this has been. People who write about the arts and who may be artists themselves, but if you're writing about the arts, you're like a restaurant critic, and you're taking that work into your spirit, into your soul. And it's not just a matter of judgment or of, you know, situating the work. It's personal. And so when you're doing and seeing great work, you feel nourished, you feel lifted. So I wanted to say thank you to both of you for that. Just as someone who sees as much of the waterfront as possible, I'm very, very grateful. So, and this has been an extraordinary conversation. I salute both of you. I salute the genius that you represent and that you sort of nourish and offer. And thank you both.
Thank you, Rob. Wonderful to be in your presence, both of you.